radio show that looks to inform, educate, and hopefully make you laugh. Stu and the Nunn is a show focused on national security, policy, politics, and selfless service. We do this by not only interviewing guests, but also sharing our perspectives and asking you, the listener, to interact with us on our show chat room, via our Facebook page, and on Twitter.
Where everybody has a chance to build a home we are proud to know and give respect to those who made it so. We start to keep the dream alive. We are alive. American dream. We speak our minds and fight to keep our dream alive.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Stu and the Nunn. We are episode 73 is where we're knocking tonight. And welcoming them back. A good friend, past guest, Mr. Brooks Tucker here with joining Toby and I. And welcome Toby back, too. Toby was out for a couple weeks. I think we were off last week. So good to be back and got a phenomenal gentleman with joining us tonight to help bring the class up a little bit on the show. Huh, Toby?
Yeah, well, we were getting a little bush league again. It's sporadic and out of control and in different countries. We're still in different countries, but we're still cracking. Well, this is San Pellegrino, though.
I was going to say, it sounded what that was. You're like, bush league crack.
No, we're still.
At least it wasn't a bush light,
a latte, no bush lattes. But no, it's great. And, having Brooks back is awesome because, it was about this time last year that we had him on, and we got into some stuff, and it was the changing of the guard, so to speak. And so it's really great to have him back, to kind of go and look at what the year in reflection really is. So pretty cool, pretty excited about it. Yeah. Welcome, Brooks.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Great to be back, and I even got a haircut today for you. So
I think. Oh man! Didn't the first time you come on, weren't you wearing a sport coat?
Yeah, well, I think I was still in kind of that high intensity mode.
You were still in that DC government mode, and we were like, dude, you're really making us look bad when our guests were in the sport coat.
We're like T-shirts and
hats on backwards and drinking Pellegrinos or whatever you're drinking there.
Hey, I'm trying to stay
hydrated. Stay hydrated, change your socks, take Motrin, right? You know how to take care of yourself. As every medic and corpsman taught us all. But well, Brooks, again, welcome back on. Thank you so much. I mean, you are. We put up posts and everything. You have accomplished a lot, giving to this country, not only in years of military service in the Marine Corps, but also giving back to our veterans and in civil service through the VA and other methods. But if you wouldn't mind, just kind of refreshing maybe some of our listeners, viewers, a little bit about your background and bring so they can bring that into context as we get into a number of great topics with you tonight.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to cover it as quickly as possible so we have max time for conversation discussion. But my last job in the federal government ended on 20 January of this year. The last administration left Washington, and I had spent 9 months as the chief of staff of the Department of Veterans Affairs in D.C., working for then Secretary Wilkie. Prior to that, I was for almost 3 years in the same department, the same location, the Assistant Secretary for Legislative and Congressional Affairs for the VA, which essentially I oversaw all the congressional initiatives and efforts and the strategy and planning for the VA in Congress for President Trump. And I got there primarily because I worked on Capitol Hill for up to 6 years, working on defense as well as VA policy issues, as a professional staff member on a committee and also as a personal staff member to a U.S. Senator, Richard Burr from North Carolina. My route to the Hill was a little bit unorthodox. Most people go to the Hill in their 20s or 30s. I went there in my early 40s as a Marine Corps Congressional Fellow, activated for a year, along with roughly 12 or 13 other Marines who went to the Hill, service-wide program and DoD-wide program. So that I was in in a 1-year advisory capacity for the senator. And prior to that, I was in the reserves in the Marine Corps and then active duty. All told, I got out in 2013 with about 20 years and plus active and reserve cumulatively. And I had a prior career in financial services for 13 years for 2 major global financial firms. That was where I went to after my initial active duty service. But have deployed a few times, first Desert War, then to Iraq, and then Afghanistan for a short period of time. And then between did some off CONUS training missions in North Africa and the Caucasus. So that pretty much kind of rounds it out for my timeline of service, both in and out of government and the military.
So, Brooke, one of the reasons, we're excited to have you back is because, like, when you were the chief of staff of the VA, you guys started some really cool initiatives. And, I just want to, kind of, first and foremost, customer service with the VA was, I'm using those words together, but, under y'all's watchful eye, the customer service in the VA improved. And that wasn't just my opinion, there was, surveys, there was a lot of feedback and just word on the street, everyone's we feel like we're interfacing better. We feel like, we're cared about. We're feeling like, when I submit something there's a follow-up and just those little things, because in reality, the VA is just the largest customer service center for the United States. And you deal with a broad spectrum of people, broad spectrum of places, and but you guys had some pretty cool initiatives, and you went through some tough times. The veteran suicide rate, was going through the roof. I remember in 08, 09. The veteran suicide rate was about 8 or 9, per day. And then, it jumps up in the next 3-4 years and we start getting in the teens. And then we get, then it was depending on which study you read, anywhere between 21 and 23 a day. And then you guys start dialing that in, reeling it back. And, you got it back in the teens, and I know that number's not great, but it's better than it was. So all these things, just kind of recap some of the initiatives that you all started that you felt, were received well and took traction. And then guys, because I just kind of want to have a point of context, because I kind of want to dive into it, some things that are going on now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think what happened was the President Trump, made veterans a centerpiece or cornerstone of his campaign, which I don't think any other president in modern history has done or ever contemplated. I think because he had a strong passion for wanting to make sure that this issue, this writ large of the VA, that was sort of a dysfunction junction kind of location and place as a government agency, got a lot of attention. So when we came in, we really came in with a tailwind from the president's campaign to focus on a lot of issues that had been lingering or had been kind of teetering on the edge of success or failure from a legislative perspective with Congress. There had been multiple attempts with certain legislation that hadn't moved. There was other legislation that really needed to be passed and enacted because systems and processes that were put in place under the prior administration had not really functioned well for a variety of reasons that were not political. It was probably a lot of process problems. And that led to the Phoenix fiasco, which was really a horrible black eye for the department, with folks waiting for care. It was found that was pervasive to a lot of other medical centers where there were wait lists for care, and people who perhaps died as a result of that or indirectly because of the long waits for care. So we came in with a department that was rated, depending on which year you looked at it, number 16 or 17 in the all employee surveys of federal employees. large agencies, 16 or 17, consistently for several years under the prior administration, and one that I think had really been beaten up in the press pretty significantly. The mandate for the secretary at that time, and then for Secretary Wilkie, who came about 13, 14 months after the first secretary took office, was to get a lot of this legislation that had sort of been floating around in Congress, to get it moving, to get it pushed through, and to get it signed by the president. And in the first 2 years, there were significant numbers of bills passed with huge price tags and huge expectations on them. That process of getting those bills through happened usually, as it does, the first 2 years of any administration. So we had the VA Appeals Modernization Act, which streamlined and changed the way veterans can get their appeals heard. So it's not one big python trying to swallow all the appeals. They had 3 tracks they developed: a fast track, a medium track, and a longer, kind of more detailed track. That changed the whole appeals process. So we were able in a few years to really reduce the backlog of appeals, which was a maddening situation for a lot of veterans. The Mission Act, which opened the aperture for community care. As you all know, it's been controversial for years. I'm not sure why, because you're not going to privatize the second largest department in the country the way some people say you will, by opening it up for veterans to have access to their community doctor if the VA can't meet certain standards of access and time frame for appointments. That was passed. That was a huge game changer for the VA. You had other initiatives that were not as well thought of, like the Accountability Initiative and the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, which was used as a political football, unfortunately, by both sides. We never really got that right, I don't think. It was just too politically a hot potato because of the union pushback on it, and because so many other agencies are involved in accountability within the federal government. So it was like an alphabet soup of entities that VA had to try to compete with to get that mission accomplished. And you look at what was done with the GI Bill, the expansion of that, the Forever GI Bill. So huge legislative accomplishments in the first 24 months. And I think that set the stage to push on customer services you talked about. I'll just pause for a minute on that, is that customer service had been brewing in VA, how to fix customer service, how to get it better for several years, even before President Trump came in. But what he did was he just lit a fire under it and said, we are going to relentlessly focus on this, and we are going to ask veterans what they think, not just in some stale survey once or twice a year, but we're going to text message them on their phones after they have an appointment and ask them, what did you think? And then we're going to try to trace that back to root cause problems within the system or facility and try to fix those problems. And I think what's interesting as a validator of that is that the current administration took VA's, what they call their CX program, their customer experience program, and is now going to deploy that template across the federal government to get feedback from customers of all federal agencies. It's a huge undertaking, but it was spawned at VA by folks prior to our coming in, and it was really ignited while we were there. So I'll pause there and just see if you want to delve into any of those things, but happy to talk about any of them.
Yeah, I kind of do. So the appeal process, probably the biggest hot button with the VA or anyone that interfaces with the VA. Speaking from personal experience, I've applied for what's it called? It's an appeal, but it's a form of appeal because there was an error made on the behalf of the reception of my information or my records or whatever. Mm-hmm. They said that I didn't have records of a certain thing, and then in my records they demonstrate that they did. So it's like one of the internal mistake thing. But getting information on it, is a lot to do with how I handle it. But I think most people like immediately feel that the VA is like State Farm or Allstate or something. And hey, I'm going to apply for this, because it's like insurance. This is what's wrong with me. And, and they feel like they're going to get this immediate rejection letter, and then they got to go through this whole appeal process and stuff. Do you think like the changes that you guys made, let me rephrase that. Do you think the current administration's change of approach on it not only put it back, do you think it, damaged, is so detrimental to that it's damaged it for a long period of time that's going to take to fix it? The work that you guys did and the amount of time that you did it, do you think damage has been done to that system now that it'll take much longer than that to undo what's been done?
I don't think the current administration is going to tinker in an adverse way with the appeals process. I think that we came through last year with the appeals process really being hindered because of COVID. They tried to shift from in-person hearings to telehearings, which was very slowly accepted by a lot of the VSOs in the nation. I know that the chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals was proselytizing essentially to the VSOs to use telehearings during COVID, because that was something that she wanted to get done and implemented, because it would obviate the need for the veteran to have to travel. They could get on their iPhone and have their hearing from the comfort of their own couch. And I think that gradually took root in the VSO community. I think there was a lot of maybe some old school thinking about it and not a lot of receptivity to it. I think people thought, well, maybe this COVID thing will be over quickly, so why should I get on this iPhone and do my hearing when I'll just go in person sometime like I always do, or everyone tells me I should do. I don't know the stats on telehearings lately, but I heard that in the last probably 6 to 9 months that they had gotten a lot more traction with that. So hopefully that's getting pushed out and distributed to the veteran community as an option, because COVID may have shut down certain offices or limited staffs. I don't know whether, I think that for the most part, the offices are now open to a great extent. But my concern as the chief of staff in the height of COVID was we really moved rapidly, for a lot of very sound health reasons, away from in-person presence of staffs in offices. And I think that's something that's been validated by corporate America. You don't need to always be in the office. You can kind of come in and do the satellite thing or sit around the table once or twice a week. Some of what VA does is a very human enterprise. And I think that VA is trying to push a lot of this technology out to veterans and hope that they can use it to limit the amount of traffic in buildings and the amount of time on the road and things like that for the customer. So trying to get back to a more customer-centric approach with appeals and benefits and healthcare. But I think the problem is that a lot of this country where veterans live does not have, I don't know, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but does not have the kind of broadband access that places in urban, suburban America have. And a large proportion of veterans live in rural communities where access to getting on your phone and doing your telehearing may not be what you can get, or it might not have any fidelity. So I think of the appeals process net was a good outcome. COVID disrupted it. The technology came in to try to mitigate that disruption. I don't know whether they've ever gotten back to a good place yet with that. I think they're still crawling out of that hole that COVID dug for them in 2020. And I know they're hiring more judges to staff the Board of Veterans Appeals to deal with the backlog. But it could be another couple of years before they get out of that. Whereas when we were there, probably could have been out of it by now, but for the disruptions from the pandemic.
Yeah, some good stuff. I have a few things. First, I got a couple questions. First one, Brooks, one is coming from our chat room. It's actually from our Rob, our unpaid producer. He asks, every administration has tried to fix the VA. What is your opinion? Why is it still a mess? If every administration comes in saying they're going to focus on it and they try or looks like they make attempts at it, why do you think it's still a mess? Why is it never caught on to be?
Yeah, well, look, I spent 5 years in Congress as a staffer oversight of the VA, and I think it's very easy to look at it from the outside or from personal experience or experience from people who share their kind of, and I used to say as a VA, we all have kind of a soda straw view of VA. We don't ever get the macro view, but I don't think the department is, a mess. I think this is the largest federal healthcare system in the nation. 170 hospitals, several thousand clinics, 7 million plus active users of the healthcare system. And I would suggest that it does a pretty good job most of the time. There are places where bureaucrats and administrators get in the way of the veteran getting the kind of care and benefits that they should be getting. I think that's what we were trying to get after with the customer service initiatives, is pinpoint where those soft spots and those gaps were in the system. But it requires constant attention and constant diligence and accountability. And those have, just like any organization, those have to run up and down the chains of command throughout the system. And I think the problem with the VA is you have a system where you're probably, in most cases, paying, on the healthcare side, you're paying physicians and expert administrators, far less, probably a fraction of what those people, if they're competent, could make in the outside world. So you hope you're hiring people who are competent and have a passion for service. I think in some cases, people are hired and promoted who don't have competence or don't have a passion for service. And that's a fault of how we promote people within the system. Sometimes it's a fault of selection of leaders. They were trying to get to a better leadership selection process. It's tough to tell someone in the VA, like you do in the military, well, if you want to be a regimental commander, this is what you got to do, because you don't have that kind of process in the VA like you do in the military. There's not that expectation. So you hire a lot of people from the outside who come in, and sometimes they don't work. And their leadership reflects throughout the system, and that creates the messes that people hear about, the customer service problems, the process issues. I also think the VA is underinvested in technology for years. Our CIO would show us statistics of how VA was number 12 in the federal government as far as investment in IT. And it's a very IT intensive operation. So all those things contribute to the messes that people see. But I don't think the messes define the entire department. Unfortunately, that's what the press covers, and that's what people on Capitol Hill talk about. Right. But those are more anecdotal than systemic. But there's plenty of systemic issues that need to be tackled.
Yeah, it's 80-20 rule, right? And majority are probably doing well, but it's that 20% that gets the attention, right? It's the 20% when a veteran walks into a waiting room and kills himself, or out in the front lawn, or you hear these stories of a veteran dying in their wheelchair and no one even knowing and waiting on an appointment. Excuse me. But unfortunately, that's what gets the attention. I mean, to be honest and fair, as a recipient of the VA services and a father of a son of a recipient and all that, and my own father, I look at that and my experience in the just the commercial space and industry and what I do. To be honest, hospitals. I mean, the VA is, I don't want to say coin operated, but like you talked about, they can't get maybe the best doctors or best pharmacists or whatever, because they just don't pay a lot. Maybe some sign up out of a sense of service and do it and say, I'm going to go take care of veterans. But I think that's such a small amount. I mean, the joke used to be, what do you call a doctor graduates at the bottom of their class? Now it's, instead of just saying doctor, you say VA doctor, right? I mean, it's kind of whether that stereotype is true or not. But
yeah, I think it's a stereotype, but there's some truth in some places to that.
Right. But hospitals themselves, civilian hospitals, are also are coin operated, right? They may they turn away patients. You don't have insurance, we're not paying for it, we're turning you away. And if you do, we'll take your insurance and bring you in. But there's hospitals that throw people out on the street, because they can't pay or whatever, and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just like there's all kind of businesses that maybe will sacrifice customer satisfaction in the interest of making revenue or bookings or whatever it may be they do. So, to be quite fair, I mean, they maybe not operate much different than any other organization that is bottom line focused, but it's a fact that their customer base is unique. It is a special customer
Mm-hmm.
base in the interest of our country, and there's no shortage of people taking shots from all. No one knows what NIH is doing. Knows what CFPB does. All these other government agencies, of which there's hundreds of and components. But the VA gets attention because it pulls heartstrings, or it helps people pull heartstrings by promoting an agenda, right? That's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, it gets negative attention. Not that it's undue, but it gets negative attention because it's an easy target. In the way I look at it, I see it that way.
And not to get too philosophical, we could always shelve this and come back to it later. But I think there's become an expectation that the VA is going to be all things for all people. And what I mean by that is we've created a system that supports an expectation that pretty much whatever ails you as a veteran, you should consider that it could be service connected, and you should come to us, the VA, or come to the VA for help. And I think that's born out of more of an all-volunteer force dynamic and post-Vietnam dynamic of some kind of institutional guilt, and also the fact that we have a disability system that is somewhat antiquated in how it deals with maladies today. Perhaps that needs to be updated. I know that it was under an update process while we were at VA. I don't know whether that has been slowed down or sped up, but it's controversial because what I think you create is you create a veteran cohort that expects sometimes maybe more than what a government healthcare system could deliver for them, and expects benefits that are maybe unrealistic based on what they're experiencing. The wonderful thing about it is for the people who really need help, there are some exceptional programs for spinal cord injury, for amputees, for TBI. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there. My concern at the level I was working at was it was kind of that old double-edged sword of you can't do enough for the country's veterans. When is enough sufficient? Or when is it overdoing it? And are there moral hazards that we create by building the system higher and higher and higher, but maybe not any stronger than it was the day before? It's just a taller skyscraper, but maybe you haven't funded that skyscraper with enough cement and bricks and mortar and steel for it to be strong to actually withstand the pressure and demand that's out there. So that's a huge discussion, but that's something that crosses my mind every day when I look at another bill that passes in Congress for yet another thing that we're going to fix or we're going to make good for people.
Yeah, you hit on an 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? And it's a touchy one.
Yeah.
Almost it's a lightning rod no one's touched. Are we building an entitlement system no different than the when you think back to FDR and the welfare systems and things that were built back during that time that were to help people out, and now people have become expectant, right? To get the free money every month and get this and get that, whatever, right? We see it across the board, in the country today. Is the VA trying to do the right thing and service our veterans, sometimes crossing too far over and building an entitlement system, one contributing to the I'm a victim, right? Because I had to serve, we've had a lot that's happened over the last 20 years. It's kind of built this victim mentality with the veterans, and a lot of us don't like. But people go, hey, I should get, I get my, it's not just medical, right? I want to remind people it's educational benefits. It's, VA, a mortgage loan. The VA provides a lot of stuff besides just, just the medical. Just the medical is the big one. But, people get out of the military today 3 years in and expect that they're going to walk in and get an 80% disability check, right? Because, they've heard about it. Or state veteran organizations, I've heard it myself, say, hey, you need to make sure every one of your soldiers come gets this, because if they don't come get this money, then it's going to dry up because they won't give it to you anymore, right? And there's this thing that people just think, hey, I do my 3 years or 6 years in, maybe I'm in the Guard or Reserve, I do 1 year combat tour, I come back, that's all I've ever done, and I'm going to be getting a check the rest of my life. It's what's owed to me. Your thoughts on that? I mean, I know you've had to see some of that and from both sides.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some kind of down at the kind of the rubber meets the road level. Is I volunteer periodically. I've done it twice this year. I didn't do it at all when I was at VA, just had no time, but I volunteered for an organization in Southwest PA that a former CO of mine founded after he got out of the Marine Corps. It was called Simplify Odyssey, and it now doesn't only work with Marines, it works with everybody from all the services. And the Simplify Fund identifies veterans in their casework file who would benefit from this week out kind of away from technology, to some degree away from their families, to reconnect with getting a purpose in life. And one of the things that I saw at this last one, I just came back from a week ago, was for the first time in several years, a much older cohort of people in the room. I think we had 24 veterans. Now, granted, people who were in their 20s in 2001 are now in their 40s today, but these were not folks coming off active duty. These are folks who had been out in the world for 10 or 15 years and who, for a variety of reasons, were now stuck, either out of a job or in a job that wasn't fulfilling, out of a marriage or a marriage that wasn't functioning, had a variety of issues from PTSD to TBIs. And a large proportion of them in the last year or so had self-isolated. Now, when you dug into what the reasons for self-isolation were, it wasn't just COVID, it was a lot of just dysfunctionality in their lives that they couldn't seem to break through. They didn't have a support network of people helping them. But a lot of them were essentially, I felt, and a lot of the team leaders and counselors there felt, were disincented from solving their problems or attacking their problems because of this money they were getting. It was dampening their enthusiasm, or it was affecting them when they had a job. I had one person on a team with me who I was helping who had a job, but admitted that they really didn't need a job and were there kind of just to have something to go to. But they clearly were getting close to 100%, not 100% disability for post-traumatic stress and other issues. These folks have a wonderful resource in the money they get, but if they're not contributing to society, I'm not sure what we're hoping they'll do as a result of that compensation. That compensation wasn't there for, hey, here's a check, just sit in your room and play on your Xbox for the next 30 years and, don't treat your family right, or don't go out and try to solve problems, or don't try to be a member of your community. And I think there's a clear disincentive, especially when you get up to those high dollar amounts, where if you're not living in a high rent part of the country, you can live very well off a few $1,000s a month. Maybe you're married to someone, or maybe you're not, but maybe you've got some other source of income through other means that are kind of take you over the top. So I think it is a moral hazard what we're creating. I just don't think you're ever gonna dial it back. I think the only way you do it is you decide that it's creating too many perverse disincentives. But I don't know how you actually articulate that to the American public or to the veteran community in a way that people will understand that and accept it for future generations.
Brooke, you said something at the beginning of this thread, the moral dilemma of it, right? You talked about the morality in your own thoughts of it. I had this exact conversation at breakfast today with someone down here and that's not as connected to the veteran community as, like, say, Troy or I, or someone that's just a third party looking in, and always saying, hey, I don't think there's enough that we can do. And I'm like, well, there's a point, like you just said, where we're doing too much. Since the beginning of time, men have been going to combat, have been fighting, and then they've returned to their families and they've had to continue on with their life. We've seen instances and documentation of post-traumatic stress, all the way from Theocles, I said it wrong, I'm sure, but from Greek times, in the Bible it's mentioned, like one of the most famous Psalms in the history of the Bible, Psalm 23, like, has references to, to walking through the valley of the shadow of death, not just like death, but like, dealing with, written by David, one of the greatest warriors of that time.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that came back that didn't get a chance to raise their hand, like Troy and I both, like, walked into an office somewhere, tried to negotiate the best deal that we could, signed a name, raised our hands, and then, like, did our part. And there were guys, in the teens, in the late 30s, early 40s, in the early 50s, and in the 70s and 60s and 70s, that they didn't, walk into an office and try to negotiate their best deal and see, like, where the dice fell, due to their ASVAB and, who they knew or whatever. They didn't get the chance to do that, and they went and they served, not just like for little periods of time. They left and they came back when it was done. Those guys and gals, I don't want to make it sound like only dudes do this, came back and they became the greatest generation. They came back and created, boomers. They came back and, were very, very productive members of society. And when you look at a lot of what we have that makes America so great, it was built on the backs of guys and gals that came back from doing something from this country and turned it into something great. And a lot of them took the GI Bill. A lot of them, like, in different forms, all the way, the earliest forms of waivers, the GI Bill, Montgomery GI Bill, now to the post 9/11 GI Bill, like, and did something great and contributed amazing ways. But they moved forward. Like, they didn't get stuck. And we have a whole generation now of veterans that they didn't serve that long. Some did put in some careers, and, like, I'm probably going to take some, like, angry DMs here in a little bit for saying this, but the reality is like, you're talking about 100% for post-traumatic stress. Like, yeah, that's a real thing, but the vast majority of people that are collecting that paycheck, they could be contributing to society. They could be doing more than they're doing. And we have, like, now, like, when you talked about the polytrauma units, there's 4 of them in the United States. So those are some amazing facilities. The Minnesota facility, the Florida facility, like Tampa, Palo Alto in California, of course, Audie Murphy down there in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. Some of the most amazing, when you think about the Centers for the Intrepid, when you think of the things that we've been able to do to help, like, with traumatic brain injury, like, we have professional sports teams and leagues, looking at what the VA's learned from traumatic brain injury to see how they can better the quality of life of their athletes. We have, from around the world, we have, like, just leading on, different things about learning about hyperbaric treatments, like groundbreaking stuff that is come out of, like, the efforts to help a certain. But then on the other hand, yeah, we are doing too much for some people. I know that's an unpopular thing to say, but I love how you put it, when you talk about the morality of it. Troy mentioned it earlier, like, creating the system of welfare, like, because, like you said, some people can make more money doing nothing, and they're going to sit there, smoke weed, and, because, like, it's their right to do it and get paid and not contribute, to society, not seek the purpose that they have, to be a better dad. Like, being in the military is an exceptionally noble purpose. You're doing something bigger than yourself, for the betterment of your country, for the betterment of your society. But you can still find noble purpose in being a good dad, being a good husband, like being a business owner, being a good employee,
being a volunteer, a leader in your local community, whether it be church, scouts, whatever it may be. Yeah. But
like this whole I did this one time, you owe me, you have a point in saying that, we have a moral obligation to pay attention to when we've done too much, and in certain areas, and where we haven't done enough in others. And but anyway, I
Brooks, you hit on it in the fact that how do you roll that back without upsetting? How are you able to? To me, it looks like an impossible task, right? You can't take away when you give somebody something.
Yeah,
you're not going to. I think what we need to do is focus even more directly or relentlessly on this segment of the population. And I'm by no means saying that it's even 50% or even maybe 30%. Maybe it's 20 or 15% of the population out there. And I'm just trying to be fair. I don't think it's a large percentage, but 15 or 20% of a couple million people who went to war in the last 20 years is still a big number of people. And I wonder about those folks who, like you were saying, for whatever reasons, can't focus on volunteerism as an outlet for them. If they're making enough money, they don't need a paycheck from, the local establishment or the company down the road, then why aren't you volunteering? Why aren't you giving back? Because that's what you were doing in the military. You've got to reconnect yourself to giving back to the community. You don't have to wear a uniform to do that. Maybe if you want to be in the volunteer fire department, cool, you got a uniform. But maybe you're doing something at a food kitchen or soup kitchen or something. I think we have a problem in this country with the cohesiveness of a lot of communities, and I think veterans can bridge those gaps. But if people in those communities are veterans who are self-isolating or excluding themselves from the workforce of the volunteer service force because they feel like they don't have to do that anymore, that they've kind of paid their dues, that's the wrong message to send to them, that's okay. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to, if we run into those folks or know them, to try to challenge them more, because for every one of them we can get back into the fight, so to speak, the better off they're going to be, the better off they have a family, their family's going to be, and the better off society should be because of their contributions. And I look at this generation, like you're saying, and I think there's far too many of them who are, I'll be pretty blunt, who are half-stepping it or who just aren't engaged. Not the majority of them, not even the large minority of them, but enough of them that it bothers me that when I go to these sessions a few times a year and I see these folks sitting across from the table and they kind of pour out their experiences. And I just think, so you've got all this experience, you did all this, and you're sitting in your house, staring at the TV all day. How did you get to that point? And then there's a reason how they got there. You need to unpack that with them. And I can't do it in 1 week. It takes therapy. It takes help from trusted advisors and counselors. But those folks have something to offer. They're not deadbeats. They've gotten into this habit of not doing, and we've got to get them out of that because they're productive members of society. They proved that when they went in the service. They can do it again.
Yeah, I know Troy wants to switch to something really fast. But sure. I just want to make a quick little point on this is I think this poisons the water, not just of the veteran community. I think it poisons the water of society when we let it continue to do this. And one of the reasons for that is because as veterans, we don't have exclusivity on pain and suffering and trauma. And, nope. If we're getting paid for post-traumatic stress and we're getting these big checks and, that affords us to sit on the couch, is that really fair to the young boy or the young girl that got violently traumatized? They understand pain, they understand suffering, they understand loss, just as much as we do. And like it's a slippery slope. If we pay if one organization pays, and continue to assist us bad. But go ahead.
No problem. You're getting kind of broken up there. So, yep, no problem. I had a bad connection.
No, sorry.
That's all right. So one of the things I'll talk about as a Desert Storm veteran myself, just like you, Brooks, this is something that kind of is near and dear to my heart. But this Toxic Exposure Benefits Act that's stalled in Congress, it's been there for a long time. I think upwards of 10 years or something like that. I mean, this has been, obviously we can go back to Agent Orange in Vietnam and obviously things back as far as World War I in the trenches, right? There were things that happened to our veterans and all the way up. But this act that's up there that's been stalled, it's been sitting there in front of in a Congress that both sides, no matter what their party is, claim and will go in front of a camera and speak the great graces, want to come across as super military friendly and all that stuff, short of like 4 or 5 new younger members. The rest of them definitely try to come across that. What is your thoughts about why is this stall? What does this not have? Is it not have the right attention to what would cause Congress not to move on this when they move on a lot of other stuff, from impeachments to passing bills in the middle of the night to raise funding to everything else? Why are they not motivated to do something about this?
Well, I think what you have is a couple factors, and none of which are maybe the primary driver of the stasis, but you have, I think there's 3 bills trying to address this. And I'll boil it down into there's a more slow and steady approach, which doesn't comprise a long list of conditions that would be presumptive conditions. And there is a much faster, all-encompassing approach, which consists of, I think, up to 23 conditions that would be considered presumptive conditions for service members exposed to airborne toxins. And the problem is that the all-encompassing bill has been scored by the Congressional Budget Office at, I think, $300 billion over 10 years. My personal / quasi-professional assessment is that with all the other spending bills that have moved through the Congress this year, that people may be feeling a little bit hard to imagine in any Congress in the last 20, 30 years, but especially the last 10 years, but some spending fatigue and questioning whether the all-encompassing bill, although the most generous of those out there, is really where they want to go. Because my concern as someone who worked in VA and also worked in Congress is that oftentimes the authority to presume these conditions are service connected far outpaces the funding stream to pay for everything that has to go into that happening. And so we let the horse run way ahead of the cart, and everyone gets their moment out in front of the Capitol with all the cameras clicking, saying, well, look at this great thing we did for this generation and generations past. And then a few years later, the VA has to come back to Congress and say, well, hey, you never gave us enough money to do this. And now we're kind of eating our own seed corn to keep this going, and we need more money. And then Congress throttles the VA because no one remembers that 5 years ago, the VA never got enough money to do this thing. I also think there's some legitimate questions, and I know some people probably don't want to hear this, but there's some legitimate questions, I think, about the scope of how many conditions really warrant a service connection. I'll tell you personally, I'm not in any pain. I haven't been disabled by this, but my wife and kids will tell you pretty much every day I'm coughing up some phlegm in my throat, because when I was a rifle platoon commander in Desert Storm, we were posted in an area of the desert where we sucked in a lot of this black residue from the oil well fires for several months straight. I didn't have this condition before I went into service. I didn't have it for the entire time I deployed prior to that operation, but I had it a few months after I came back, and it's never really left me. So I understand that that's a mild condition. I think it's called rhinitis. It's not sinusitis, it's rhinitis. I could probably go to the VA and maybe get some bucks for that, for, if they tested me. But and they would probably say it's service connected based on my condition. I know there are people who have a lot more serious conditions that are disabling, that are debilitating, and that they're painful, and some of them have died from them. But I don't know whether the science is as rock solid as the John Stewarts of the world will say it is around some of these conditions. The VA has allowed 3 of them to be service connected in the last few months. One of them is the rhinitis, one is sinusitis, and I think asthma is the third one. But a lot of these rare cancers are not easily just sort of connected. I know people will tell you they are, and they'll cite articles. My understanding is it's not as straightforward and simple as all these cancers are immediately connected. And maybe we'll find out in years from now that they are, or at some point they'll gradually make them presumptives. But right now, I think it's a battle between some of it's science, a lot of it's just people's appetite for more spending in a year where they're probably kind of exhausted from spending on all these other programs.
It's funny you bring that up, because, one of the things that I'm very curious about is, real versus, sorry, that's not what I want to say. The service connected and socially connected. It appears like this administration is, putting some time and effort into inclusion and equity, and trying to, do some of this social things that, are being done. Like, what are your thoughts on the new stance on that? And then, is that really the business of the VA to get into that?
Yeah, I'm not as hardcore about this as other folks are. I mean, we have a growing population of female veterans, and I think they need to make sure that they are well cared for and tended to, and that there's services and staff and people who are attuned to the unique conditions they may have, whether it's
absolutely
MST or it's something that's specific to the female physiology and biology. But
Amen.
My sense is that the current administration is doing some things that don't really make sense to me. Like, they just had a piece of legislation that was passed by Congress. Of course it was passed. I mean, they're not going to not pass this stuff that says that VA medical centers are going to now offer birthing classes for pregnant veterans. The problem is there are 2 considerations to that. One is VA medical centers don't deliver babies. And if you're going to have a birthing
it's not
class,
service connected.
Yeah, it's not service connected. Well, and so VA has OBGYNs, and they provide a lot of female specific services, but they don't deliver babies. There's no maternity ward in the VA hospital system. But yet they're going to say they're going to offer birthing classes. That sounds really cool and neat, and maybe it's very appropriate. But the problem for most women, and ask your significant others or anyone who's had a child, is that most of the time they want to have those birthing classes at the hospital where they're going to have the baby. It's one of those things where, well, that's a really cool idea and that's neat and good to go. Sounds like it could be utilized by some people, maybe not by many. I don't know. We'll see where in a few years whether anyone has a lot of use for that. But my concern is that it gets back to sort of, can we stay on our core missions? And what are our core missions? And if this thing is not really something we could support downstream, why are we committing ourselves to it now, regardless of what it is, whether it's birthing classes or something that has nothing to do with female veterans? And I just get the impression from reading the news and talking to people that the current administration is heavy on messaging, but maybe a little bit light on execution and serious policy sometimes. And I don't mean that as a blanket statement. I just mean that I think they came in fact, I know they came in several months ago across the board. The mindset in the Biden administration was, let's continue to run on all cylinders off this Trump bad, Biden good. Trump's solutions didn't work. Our solutions will. And I can tell you from people I've talked to at the VA headquarters that, like a lot of administrative departments under Biden, they just essentially turned the dial 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So whatever was in place, even if it was working, had to be discredited or maligned or treated in a negative fashion. Whatever they were doing had to be the better answer. The problem with that is that they disrupted the governance of these departments. VA especially, which runs a hospital system, benefit system, was disrupted by some of this. And what they didn't have was a plan for what they were going to do. So they flipped the switches 180 degrees, but no real plan for once that switch got flipped. And then it created a lot of second, third order effects through the system, which I think they're coming to grips with now a year in and realizing maybe slowly they need to mitigate. But I think they were intent on discrediting an operation that was running pretty well, always can run better. And that has sort of been their mantra for the last several months. And I wonder where you go for the next 3 years, because if that's your answer in year one, well, then you darn well better fix all this stuff in the next 3 years, because you had all the smart people who supposedly came in. We're gonna do what we couldn't do for 4 years.
Well, it's interesting. What's scary is the case study we have where that got reversed, and that is the Remain in Mexico policy, right? Of all the policies that the Biden administration turned around from the Trump administration and canceled, they've just recently reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy, I think last week, right? One that President Biden got rid of right away. But look what it took for them to do that, to swallow their pride or eat crow or whatever you want to call it, to sit there and go, actually, we need to have that. Like, look how bad it's gotten at the border, right? And that's just what people see on the news. We know it's 1,000 times worse that the cameras aren't looking at. For the administration to say, we've got to reverse back and do that, that was actually the right thing. That's what scares me. How much more has to happen to the VA or anywhere else? But since we're on that topic, for them to maybe start putting some of those policies, some of those faith-based programs, all that kind of stuff the VA was working on back in place. How many veterans have to die? How many people have to suffer for that to realize that, okay, we shouldn't have got away from it just because it came up under a program under somebody else.
Well, I will tell you that I think they're fortunate in this first year. There hasn't been a flashpoint of a crisis. And I think that probably shows you how perhaps resilient the department has been over the last few years, is that they've kind of weatherproofed themselves and done enough detailed planning and have enough processes in place where you're not going to see some huge debacle or crisis erupt for a while. My concern is that there's a chipping away of some of what was put in place over the last few years, things that bipartisan in Congress people were in favor of. So it wasn't a partisan issue. But I think that this kind of tipping point of ideology over functionality is a concern for me, looking as an insider who's now outside looking at the enterprise, is ideology going to indirectly chip away or dilute some of the goodness that the system has grown into kind of habituating and using? Community care is one area that I think is a concern. Hear a lot of anecdotes lately about veterans being denied access to community care. Most concerning to me is the mental health care part of that channel. Veterans who are saying, hey, I went to the VA and asked to be admitted for inpatient care because I feel like I need that right now. That's where I should be. And the VA saying, no, you don't need that right now. We can't get you inpatient in our system. We'll do a telehealth appointment with you, and then we can get you in like 2 months from now. And then the veteran says, well, but I've got these nonprofit that's just an hour from my house that I could get into tomorrow. They say they got space. No, you don't need to do that. We'll take care of you. Let's do telehealth, or let's do this, or let's do that, or let's treat you outpatient. It's kind of this nefarious, just below the surface, chipping away dilution of what's required of them statutorily. And I don't think it's endemic throughout the enterprise, but I think there's enough of it that's kind of seeping in around the edges that I worry that at some point they will have some folks who will harm themselves or maybe die as a result of their own hand, and leave a note saying, hey, I kept calling. They wouldn't let me in. Right.
And we've seen that.
I
already.
hope that doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah, we've seen those cases and know of those, and they're high profile because someone does it right in the middle of a waiting room, or they light themselves on fire in front of the hospital, whatever it may be. So, hey, we're getting up on the hour. I do have one more question, and then we're going to wrap. We're going to give you, because you've been so gracious in giving us time. But one thing that came about as we were talking tonight, it made me think, right? This country has a history of, after every big war and that kind of thing, they immediately downsize the military, and they immediately try to get this. It happened after World War I, War II. Man, it happened after Desert Storm. We saw what Clinton did to our military right after that. And obviously this being the longest wars we've had, especially after this terrible debacle of the Afghan pullout, is that with, suicide rates seem to be dropping. You talked about spending fatigue, right? Our country's been like, hey, we've been supporting the troops for 20 years, and our yellow ribbons have faded away, and veterans getting all these benefits. Do you have any fear or concern that our country, between the spending fatigue and the veterans not being in, wars not happening, and people thinking, okay, we're wrapped up with that, I'm broke, inflation's going up, everything else, I'm going to focus on me. Do you think our military is going to start going through kind of just being ignored again, and military being active through the veteran community? They're like, hey, they've had enough. They got 20 years of us loving him. We're moving on to something else. I seem to have this thing, this fear that that's going to happen.
Well, if the budget for the National Defense Authorization Act is any indication, I don't think Congress wants to see that happen for a variety of probably national security and personal, lobbying relationships. But I just saw that the NDAA authorized another, 4 additional naval warships in the budget. There's expansion, a lot of technology to counteract what the Chinese are developing. So I think that I would hope we're going to get smarter about how to spend those dollars. Because my sense is, and not to get too esoteric here, but my sense is that the wars we're going to fight in the future are not going to be these large land army, wars of like Desert Storm or high volume troops on the ground type of thing. I think the Chinese, the Russians are fighting us right now on so many levels that we're not even aware of in most cases, but there's an actual low level war going on with them at this moment. And they've learned from looking at Desert Storm and OAF and OEF where not to prosecute and challenge us. So I think that the defense budget is going to continue to be strong. What I worry about is the will of our political class to actually draw some lines and make these adversaries realize not that we're going to go to war with them at the drop of a hat, but that there are penalties for their conduct, and we're going to hit them back in some ways through cyber or other manners that maybe are not as visible to the American public. But the fatigue on taking care of veterans, I don't know where that is. I think there's still a lot of deep well of appreciation in the public for veterans. I just think some of it's really misplaced. I think it's kind of like this, pet a veteran type thing, or these where you go and let's take them, let's go skiing in Aspen. Well, these guys have been out 10, 15 years, don't need to ski in Aspen. They need to figure out how to communicate with their kids and their wife. And how to get
Toby's ready to hit on him. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
I agree.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's where I think the VA needs to work more closely with communities on veteran issues, because the VA is always reluctant to get involved with community partners, because I think maybe they're worried they're going to look bad or maybe not look as good. But it's not about looking good. It's about taking care of these folks. So if there's a channel in the community to plug into and it's verified and validated as good, I think the VA needs to be open to doing something with those folks as opposed to closing them off.
Right.
And that's where I think this ideology issue comes in. The more you have a government-centric solution to everything, there's problems, because we know the government can't reach into everybody's community.
Right. Absolutely. It's got to come from the locals, right? As President Reagan said, right? The worst, scariest thing said is, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. So, but hey, Brooks, thank you so much for coming on with us tonight. Really appreciate, you gave us a full hour plus. Well, so awesome you came back. We had a lot of good stuff to cover. Time just flies by. I know there's more we want to talk about, but I can see into the future that we will definitely have you on again. You bring the IQ level up very high on this show.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, you guys like to play that, but you're pretty darn smart too, I know.
We can sometimes make a show, like radio show, start and play music. That's about the extent of it. But yeah, hey, so much. Wanted to thank you. And also, I wanted to just, for those that weren't watching the news or whatever today, I just want to call out, right, today was a pretty remarkable day in our country, right? The three soldiers, 3 NCOs, no offense there, Brooks, but 3 NCOs were all awarded the Medal of Honor Day, 2 posthumous, 1 active, right? Master Sergeant Earl Plumley was awarded it alive, even though it was said to be posthumous at the ceremony. Very awkward. And
I didn't see that.
Yeah, and Sergeant First Class Christopher Salise from the Ranger Battalions, who used to be a Citadel cadet, and Sergeant First Class Alan Cash, who was way overdue for his recognition.
Way overdue.
Yeah.
And
incredible story. No.
Yeah, and so three. We try not to use the term hero too much because it gets way overused, but there's no better definition than these 3 gentlemen being recognized today, all on the same day. And I think that was just a phenomenal thing to call out. If you did not see the news today or whatever, I encourage people to go just read, click the links, go to the Pentagon site. Tomorrow will be the ceremony at the Pentagon. Their full write-ups are on there. Go see what these 3 gentlemen did, because they are a hint at how great this country and our military is, and what our people are willing to do. I think we all know people have done things as awesome, but just it doesn't always work out. People get recognized, but these guys did. So, yeah, I want to just get that out there. Thank you again so much, Brooks, for coming on. Toby, you got anything before we close out, my friend?
I do not. Brooks, thanks for coming by, and I have more that we could talk, and look forward to getting you back on so we can get to some of that other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Glad to come back when it's relevant and there's something to talk about.
You're like our own little inspector general on the VA. You kind of keep track of what's happening and bring us the latest.
Yeah, well, there's other stuff that's going on there that I don't want to get into, but it's sort of a retrenchment of things that we tried to change, and it's disappointing for the people who are still there that things are turned that way, but. That's a lot of inside baseball stuff that people don't need to hear about, but it's disappointing to me because I had a lot of pride in working there for 4 years, and thought and people who didn't agree with us politically there still liked us and respected us because we were trying to do those kind of things. Right. So I want to see those things continue there. Hopefully they will over time.
Yeah, but, take care of the customers, which are our veterans. So. That's it. But all right, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I do not know if we're going to do a show next week. Obviously it's getting very close to Christmas. We'll have to see. We'll let you know in the next week what our schedule is. But thank you so much for tuning in here. Stu and the Nunn, 8:00 every Thursday. And again, Brooks, thank you. Toby, thank you. And we hope everyone has a great night.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, guys.
Merry Christmas. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Stu and the Nunn Show, and we hope you had as much fun listening to it as we did hosting it for you. Don't forget to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. You can find all these links at stewandthenunn.com. We will talk to you again next Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. Also, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Commodity Outdoors, Veteran Outdoors, Enlisted 9 Fight Company, Warrior Media Solutions, and BooHammer.com. Thank you again, and have a good night.